Hi, Alan.
Hey, good morning. How you doing?
I'm blessed and highly favored, thank God. Doing well. How about you? How's your family?
Everybody's good, thank God. Yeah. I mean, we haven't seen them in 3 months, but they're doing okay. We see them on FaceTime and whatnot. But getting to be a big family.
Yeah, that's great.
How's Orly?
She's wonderful. We've
Oh,
been
good.
staying home, of course.
Yeah.
So, but she works, she has an office here, so she's teaching from here, and I have my office here. So we're perfectly happy to be home.
It's funny. This is my kind of fiasco. I mean, it's funny. My davening has been better than it's ever been. And I just, I don't have to dance at any social events, which is one of the, it's just a horrible thing for me.
Yeah, me too.
I had a prostate procedure done on election day. Just slowly recovering from that, thank God. Nothing serious, just a pipe cleaning. And that was annoying, but haven't skipped a beat. I retired back in March, and I've been just getting my financial world in order, and been pretty much enjoying it.
Yeah, that's good. So we're leaving for Israel in 2 weeks.
Oh, that's travel's okay. I mean, there you have to quarantine when you get there, I guess, or like.
So I have 30 pages of documents that I'm submitting, and I have to submit them today. And then they will respond in 5 to 7 days, and 2 or 3 days before the trip, they will let me know if I can go.
Oh, wow. It's a new world, man. It's a new world. Unbelievable.
So, and then part of it also is that both Orly and I are officially quarantined as of today.
For 2 weeks here.
Yeah. And then when we get there, we have to quarantine for 10 days.
Right. Wow. It's just unbelievable. They have those, I'm not sure what, there's a fad going on, escape the room, those.
Yeah, escape room.
Escape room. I've been in one for 9 months now. Can't figure out how to get out of my office. But hopefully we're at the beginning of the end of the light of the tunnel here.
Yeah, it's going to be a little while, but there is at least a light at the end of the tunnel that does not appear to be a train.
Right. Train wreck. But thank God. Just have you know anybody that's been affected dramatically? Or?
So I know a few people that have had it, not badly.
Yeah, my kids had it. They were my Zach and Marcy were like the first ones to have it up in New Rochelle.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and thank God, the minor effects for a short period of time, but nothing lasting. At least I hope. And that was the epicenter with that one guy in the an attorney in New Rochelle. Yeah. So, but thank God they're okay. And I don't know anybody close that really was affected badly by it. I know one guy from Great Neck that we knew pretty well, an author that was very involved in the kids' school. He passed away from it. But it's
so we only know third-hand people. Nobody directly connected to us that we know of.
Yeah. Thank God.
But I don't know if you saw my bubble.
What's that?
My bubble. Did you see Robbie's pictures?
From the Hanukkah thing?
Yeah.
No, I didn't actually.
So I got a safety pod that I wear. It's when I go out, I say we don't go out, but every 3 or 4 weeks we go to Stop and Shop.
Right. Yeah. I have.
I've had to go out a few times, but not too much since March. 3 times since March I've been out.
Well, it's funny. I told people, because my kids had it so early, we quarantined before anybody knew what was going on, because we thought we were with them. We believed the day before they contracted it, which was on Purim. They went to a Purim party on Sunday, and we were with them. We babysat Saturday night for them. So, we saw them Saturday night. And then we found out on Monday or Tuesday that they had it, and they all tested positive, the whole family. So we were worried.
I'm
so
here.
Are we going on to listen to that?
Mars, it's right here.
Where is it?
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Say good morning.
So Alan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to say the complete Halal?
Yeah. Even
So
on
what
Rosh
happens on Wednesday when it's Rosh Chodesh?
You do 1.5. No. You do on Rosh Chodesh, it's required that you remember to do Halal. The other days of Chanukah, you could forget every now and then. No. You do the whole Halal.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No, so I was telling Brian that, I was, I've been home since early in this pandemic because my kids had the virus up in New Rochelle that first week of March. So we quarantined ourselves. I've been out of the house 3 times for doctor's appointment, 1 procedure and 2 doctor's appointments. And the only time that I've been in the car, because Karen drove me to the doctor, the only time I've been in the car, I actually had to turn on my Waze to figure out how to get to the end of the driveway.
Well, I wasn't allowed to drive since,
You want to try?
well, yeah, but I wasn't allowed to drive since the surgery. And
Hey.
and when I went to start to drive, my physical therapist told me that it would be a good idea if I went to a big parking lot and practiced, and then afterwards to call him to make sure he wasn't on the road when I was.
Yeah, that's quite a new experience. How did the procedure go, Michael?
Great. It's like almost 5 months now. Oh, wait, it's 5 months. And I'm feeling very good. Very, very rarely do I have pain now in my back.
Oh, good.
Feeling very, very good.
Very, very,
Very,
good.
very good.
Yeah,
Great.
it worked.
All right,
It
great.
worked. I mean, it took the whole 5 months, but and then I had to have the prostate surgery after that because after the surgery I wasn't peeing.
Oh, that's
So.
nice.
Roto-Rooter worked great.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
3rd time's a charm.
Hey.
Hey.
Morning, everyone.
Go.
Where you going?
A little chilly.
Hello,
Excuse me?
everyone.
I need a
Happy
little
Hanukkah.
jacket. Look what you're wearing. Wow.
Let me get my papers.
Good morning, Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom.
Go.
Happy Hanukkah. Hey,
Rabbi, I want to apologize in advance. I have to leave at 10 because I have an undercover assignment that I need to go to.
what, by Beryl?
Yeah.
I gotta go too. This Sicha is indivisible. If not, you'll listen to the second half.
I have to be there. He wants me to put the thing on in 15 to be there to welcome all the kids by the time they get there.
Oh, you're the dreidel.
Yeah.
Dr. Brownstein and Dr. Shirley Papilsky joined us. Welcome to our group. Baruchim Abayim, and also Adam is the first time, Adam, right? Welcome. This is nice. This is like a healthy stock. It grows slow. It's not like a Madoff stock. It doesn't just take off. Very slow, but we are growing healthy. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakel niyeh b'dvarim.
Amen.
A blessing on the Torah. For the bracha, you want to be covering your head if you're not. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'nasan lanu v'nasan Baruch atah Adonai.
Now saying HaTorah.
Amen.
Okay, so we're going to study the development of Jewish law vis-a-vis Chanukah. What is Chanukah? What is the essence of Chanukah? Let me ask you a favor, even though I hope most of you read the Sicha, it'll help you. But for right now, forget the Sicha. Totally forget that you learned it. Sit back, relax, listen to a little shir, and we'll discuss it afterwards. And then you'll go back because I'm giving you, the Sicha is written in shorthand, and it's a very rich and very beautiful, special Sicha. So, firstly, I want to bring up this chart of the oral Torah, which I brought up in the past, of how the oral Torah works. This is obviously very, very general, that you have the Torah Shebeksav, it's called the written Torah, which is the Pentateuch or the Chumash, prophets and writings, known as Tanakh. I gave approximate dates. Please don't, you know what I mean? I'm giving general dates. And then you have the classic oral Torah, which is developed and committed to writing approximately 100, 200 CE, which is the Mishnah and the Medrash and the Zohar. I often tell you Torah has 4 columns. Pshat, the literal, Rem is the hints, which is the legal, Drush, which is midrashic and allegory, Sod, which is mystical and Kabbalistic. And you're going to have that. So in that era, at the beginning of the current common era, when the oral Torah was committed to writing, meaning all the things that were orally handed down for 1400 years, it was decided by the greats that it's time to commit it to writing or it'll be forgotten. So that's when the classic oral law was written down. I call it classic oral law, oral Torah. The truth is everything is oral Torah. The Talmud and the commentaries, even the Rebbe's teachings, it's all part of oral Torah. But classic oral Torah, or as we might call it, received oral Torah, rather than debated oral Torah. Oral Torah is sort of as it's been handed down, even though in the Mishnah there are opinions. But generally speaking, the Mishnah, Zohar, the Medrash, this is classic. You'll never find the Talmud and any of the later commentaries debating the classic oral Torah. This is classic. And why is there Mishnah and Zohar and Medrash? Because I just told you there's 4 columns. The little one, literal, doesn't need any book. That's the actual Tanakh text. And then the legal, Midrash, legal, the hint, that's Mishnah, Midrashic, and then the Zohar is Kabbalistic. So that is, and the Bryce and Tosefta are variables. They're unedited Mishnahs. It doesn't matter. But this is the body of oral knowledge. The body of oral knowledge. And then, so if somebody says, you know, it says such and such, how can you say this? It's a Mishnah, or it's a Zohar, or it's a Medrash. It's like saying it's law. It's even before the Talmud, where there is many opinions and debates, etc. And then comes the Talmud, and we know there's the Jerusalem, Babylonian Talmud, similar yet different. And the Talmud debated the Mishnah, or translated the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is very, very short. It's written for people who can see much more into 4 lines. The Talmud has 4 pages. And that debate hashes it out and makes it much more interesting and much more filled in all the pieces. The Mishnah gives a general statement, but the Talmud says that statement applies in all these cases. It doesn't apply in these cases. So without the Talmud, the Mishnah, you could say, is almost a closed book, almost like the way the Torah itself is a closed book without the Mishnah. And the Talmud now becomes a classic. And the Talmud is closed. The two Talmuds, somewhere in those numbers that I'm giving there, give or take 100 years, I don't remember exactly, they're in that era. And when the Talmud was closed, that in a sense is another end. We don't argue with the Talmud. And the reason is we don't change rules from the Talmud. And the reason is, one of the reasons is because, one of the reasons is because they were great scholars and they had all this knowledge from their teachers. And also that's when Jews started being dispersed. So there was no more centrality. And therefore there is a rule, just FYI, that nobody can make a new mitzvah or a new law post-Talmud. That's why after Chanukah and Purim, we don't also have a holiday celebrating 1948 and 1967. And, you can celebrate it, but to make it into a mitzvah and a custom for all Jews. And there were many things that happened. Maybe we should have a fast day on the day of the Spanish expulsion. The minute the Talmud closes, in a sense, because there's no more centrality and you can't say there's buy-in from everybody, that's the principle. Everything else is custom. If you want to know the difference between custom and law, it's after the Talmud. However, the Talmud itself has opinions. And then there's the two Talmuds. And for that reason, there are what's called Rishonim. Rishonim means the early commentaries. And this is the 11th, 12th, 13th century. And we look up at them as giants. They're not the Talmud. Just for those who are familiar, the Talmud would be people like Abaya and Rava. If you have a name that ends with a vowel, it's from the Talmud, because it was mostly Babylonian. Abaya, Rava, Rav Ashi, all these strange names that you're not going to name your kid if you like them. Whereas the Mishnah was made mostly in Israel, and it's Hebrew names. Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, etc. Rabbi Yoshua. Okay.
Name your kid Mendel.
At least it's not a vowel at the end. I want to see everybody. I want to see if I can.
Rabbi,
Hang on.
the first one was Yitzhak Alfasi. He was the first commentator before Rambam and the Rosh.
So you see Alphas in 1100, 1300. There's three people that are considered to be the main Rishonim when it comes to legal.
But they weren't all at the same time.
Right, but close enough.
Okay.
Michael, this is going to be confusing. Let me get started and let's comment after, okay? I don't want to lose you. It's not confusing, but I need to get you there. I'm true to my word in this class, unlike other classes. There's plenty of time for discussion. I'm giving you education, which is going to help you in this Sicha, and also it's good to know for any Sicha, for any Torah knowledge. The Rishonim, I should have written it, Rishonim, that's the term. The early commentaries is from the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th century, something like that. There's many others that you know about, like Rashi and Tosfos and Nachmanides. Why aren't they on this list? Because this list was created by the Rebbe, by the instructions of the previous Rebbe in the 40s. And the Rebbe was told, to make a chart of the development of Jewish law. So even though he included things here that are not so related to law, like Medrash and Zohar, he included them. However, this is a map of how Jewish law was developed. And I think the reason was because the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe wanted the 40s, when Jewish law was really being questioned, like who decided, and they were coming onto the scene and they want to establish this is not just you decide whatever you want, there's a system. So this is nominally a chart of Jewish law. And therefore, even though in the 1100, 1300 column, the Rishonim, there's others that are even more famous than Alphas and Rosh. I don't know how many people here have heard of the Rosh, Rambam, Ramban, Rashi, etc. Nevertheless, in the halachic term what's called poskim, the decisives. These are the three most prominent. So much so, and obviously to be one of those three, you know what I mean? They have the whole Talmud at their fingertips, the Mishnah, and all those two lines in between are thousands and thousands of pages of responsa, applying Talmudic and knowledge to new happenstance, new circumstance, new whatever. And these were giants recognized by their peers. There were a lot of big peers. And yet these three were recognized, and Michael's right, they're not the same day, but I think they're within 100 years. I think Rambam is first. Rambam, and then Rosh, and then Alphas. But they were recognized as the giants to the point that when it came time for the code of Jewish law, which is Shulchan Aruch, which comes about later in the 16th century, Shulchan Aruch is a code of law of how to actually behave practically. And it's a very practical code. It cuts out all the laws that don't apply nowadays. Like in Rambam, you have laws about sacrifices, about service in the temple, about tithing your wheat, all kind of laws that don't necessarily apply today. Whereas in the code of Jewish law, you only have law that applies, plus it applies them with all the other details that came to the fore between the 11th century and 15th century and 16th century. And then the code of Jewish law ruled on it. The code of Jewish law written by the Beis Yosef, 15 something, Rabbi Yosef Karo. And that's basically the basis of our lives as Jews, is the code of Jewish law. We don't open up the Rambam or the Rosh or the Talmud to figure out what to do. We open up the code of Jewish law. Now, wouldn't you know, the code of Jewish law has also different subs and opinions and custom, but that's more detail. If you're following the code of Jewish law, nobody can hold it against you. This way, that way, the code. Now, where does the code decide what to do? So the Beit Yosef said in his introduction, since there are three giants upon which the oral Torah is based, the three halachic giants, Alfasi, Rambam, and Rosh, I'm going to follow majority. And as great as a mind as he was, and he sometimes says, I'm going against my own gut. But, you know, they are 500 years prior, and they had traditions, that they knew things that we didn't know. They also had manuscripts that never reached us. And therefore, I'm going to follow majority. If they all three agree, great. If not, I go by 2 out of the 3, and that becomes the code of Jewish law. All right, that's just a general thing. The reason why it's helpful today, because today we're going to discuss what Chanukah is based on the Talmud, and how it's defined by these Rishonim, and how it comes down in the Shulchan Aruch, based on the principles that we just said. So let's come back. So let me bring up my spreadsheet. I have a nice spreadsheet today. Whoops. So do me a favor, don't look ahead. Stay with me. Line 3. The Gemara, also known as the Talmud, says, what is Chanukah? It's a big question. Like, what is Chanukah? And the Talmud says the Greeks entered, defiled the temple. When the Hashmonai Maccabees overpowered them, miraculously they found one undefiled jug of oil, and miraculously lasted for 8 nights. Unquote. That's pretty much a Talmudic statement. Comes along, remember we said there's Rosh and Rif and Rambam. In this case, Rosh and Rif is Alphas. I should have written Alphas. It's an acronym for Rabbi Yosef Elfasi. Rabbi Yitzchak Elfasi. Rosh and Alphas and Rambam, they disagree. And the way it works is like this. The Rosh and the Alphas say, Chanukah was established because of the miracle of the lights. Rambam says no. Brian, we just had this conversation. If you read the Sicha, the Rebbe asks your question. Not only the Rebbe, but the Rambam essentially asks you a question. The Rambam says the holiday was because of the miracle of the lights. What are you joking? The miracle of the battle and the lights. If you know a little bit of the history, the battle was miraculous and it lasted 3 years, 7 years. It was a whole series of miraculous battles. It didn't make any sense at all. And we're ignoring that because it was a miracle of lights for 7 days, for 8 days. No, it's both. That's one difference between Rambam and the Rosh and the Alphas. And I want to just tip you off right away, and you and I are probably agreeing with Rambam. But understand the Rosh and Alphas, remember the principle. The Rishonim, the early commentaries, never argue with the Talmud. The Talmud doesn't say a word about a battle, not one word. The Talmud is more wordy than I wrote it. If you read the Sicha, it's in the first paragraph. And the Talmud speaks all about the temple. There was a temple, the Greeks came in, they defiled it, but when we took it over, we couldn't find the pure oil, and that was a miracle. We found it, and we had it for 8 days. The Talmud doesn't mention the war. And the principle of the Rishonim is they don't make things up. They just teach you the Talmud. That's not what they do. That's the beauty of the Torah scholars. It's hard for smart people to study other people's opinions because they have their own. But in Torah, and this is probably true to some degree in other law systems as well, but in Torah it's certainly true that if what makes Rambam and Rosh the great people that they are, or Rashi, not so much their brilliance. Of course they're brilliant, but also their commitment to the nuance of Torah as it's been given to them. Otherwise, they might be saying smart things, but they're not Torah. So therefore, the Rosh and Alphas say to the Rambam, what are you talking about? Where'd you get it from? Did you have a dream that Chanukah was created because of a miraculous victory? It doesn't say it in the Talmud, and therefore they don't mention it. And the other difference between these two opinions, which is we're going to see an extension of these two opinions. The Rosh and Alpha say, how do you celebrate Hanukkah? What's the obligation? Praise and gratitude, which is done, by the way. How is it done? Halal and candles, candle lighting. The Rosh and Alpha say that there's no value to eating meals, unlike Purim, where it's a mitzvah to eat a meal. Just like it's important to listen to Megillah, it's a mitzvah to eat a meal on Purim. And you have to eat bread, because that's what a meal is in Torah. Where Chanukah say the Rosh and Alphas, no. The only obligation is to praise Hashem in 2 ways. Through Halal, we say Halal. Notice on Purim, we don't say Halal, by the way. We just eat meals and eat food. We read the Megillah, but we don't say Halal. On Chanukah, we say Halal and we light candles. There's no value to eating meals, whereas Rambam says praise and gratitude is, of course, part of Chanukah, but also the mitzvah of Simcha, joy. And whenever it says Simcha, it's reminiscent of the holidays that are called days of joy. And the holidays have an obligation to eat a meal. That's what makes a holiday even more strict than Shabbos in a sense. On a holiday, you have to eat meals. On Shabbos, you do unless it bothers you. Shabbos is not about Simcha, it's about pleasure. And if I don't have pleasure from the eating, let's say I feel like fasting because I want to lose weight. Some would say that you're allowed to fast on Shabbos because Shabbos is about pleasure. I take pleasure from not eating now. But on Yontif, since it's a day of joy, it's a stronger obligation than Shabbos even. So Simcha is what the Torah says, Moadim l'Simcha, festivals of joy. It automatically means meat and wine. It means meals. And therefore, Rambam rules, if meal is eaten on Chanukah, it has a status of a Sudas Mitzvah, of a mitzvah meal. There's something called a Sudas Mitzvah, a meal that became a mitzvah. What does it mean, that status? That a person, like a bris is a Sudas Mitzvah, which means if somebody gives you a piece of food from a bris, you want to eat it. There's a special blessing in it. Also, a Sudas Mitzvah has power. I don't want to go off, but the fast day of the firstborn on the day before Passover, we try to avoid it because it's not a good day to fast. It's not convenient. So therefore, they say if you have a Sudas Mitzvah, if you have a meal that's a Sudas Mitzvah, a mitzvah meal, it overrides the fast because it's a very minor fast. So if you have a bris that day, we can't always orchestrate a bris, so we make a siyum, we finish a section of the Talmud, and that makes it a legal Sudas Mitzvah. So there's certain legalities about a meal that has a status of a mitzvah. So according to Rosh and Alpha's column A, your latkes and your donuts, it's all nice and good. It'll show up on your scale, but you didn't do a mitzvah. It's nice. You're going to see later they believe it's also customary to do it. They encourage it. But you can't say it's a mitzvah, and you can't say you have to do it every night and you have to have bread. It doesn't have the status of a mitzvah, and it would not override certain things. Whereas Rambam says the meal has a status of a mitzvah if you eat it. That's based on the differences because, as we see in line 14, the reasoning of their views. Rosh and Alpha say the main miracle is the oil, and Rambam says both miracles are central, the oil and the battle. The Rebbe sort of explains this, but it's sort of self-explanatory in itself, that they hold, remember, they're holding to the literal word of the Talmud, that the only miracle that's talked about in the Talmud is the miracle of the oil. The temple was defiled. And they say, therefore, Hanukkah is a spiritual miracle. Of course, there was a war, but that was only a tool to get us to where we need to be. The main focus was the fact, because the miracle of survival we have on Purim too. Every holiday is supposed to have one theme that it gives us. The central theme of Purim is the physical survival of our people. The central theme of Shavuos is that we are given the gift of Torah study. The central theme of Chanukah, they say, is the miracle of oil, light, spiritual. That was the battle, because the battle was against Torah study. It wasn't so much against our physical survival. And therefore, they believe that the only thing that matters, the only thing we're commemorating Chanukah is the oil miracle. The wars is nice, but it's not important. And therefore, the only mitzvah is spiritual. It makes sense to commemorate a spiritual miracle, namely the temple, the light, the oil, with spirituality, namely lighting candles and saying Halal. Where's Maimonides, who says, no, you can't ignore the war, 7 years of miraculous battles. And that is also up there in importance. And therefore, he says that Hanukkah has both columns. It has a material salvation and a spiritual salvation. It has a war of survival and has a war of temple, of lights, of Torah, of spirituality. And therefore, how do you commemorate Hanukkah? With both things. You have Halal and lighting candles on the one hand, but Rambam says there's also a concept of eating a mitzvah meal. And if you eat a mitzvah meal, if you eat a meal on Hanukkah, it has a status of a mitzvah meal. This is the debate of the Rishonim about Hanukkah and their reasonings. None of this do you need the Sicha for. This is classic oral Torah teaching. And I'm on line 17, and now I'm going to explain to you why the Rebbe is in here, why the Rebbe comes to give this. I want to just get the nod of if this is clear. Give me a thumbs up or a nod if this is clear, or if somebody has a question about what we just discussed.
So I have a question. So I believe that you can't have the war without the spirituality first, because they could not have been victorious without that. If they didn't have a strong belief, then how could they possibly have won?
I love you. You're 100% right. But you know what? You're right. I want to point out to you, this Sicha is nominally legal in nature. There's going to be some Chassidus at the end. So stay with me on the legal level. First of all, I'm asking you a favor. You're right. The Rebbe says this in many Sichas. Maybe you saw it in your studies. That the only reason they had that miracle is because they had faith. But that's true Purim too. And yet we don't say Halal on Purim. We don't turn. The reason why we were saved on Purim was because of our faith. You know that? It was such a tremendous faith. That's when they really accepted the Torah, as it's talked about, because at Sinai they didn't have a choice. They were overwhelmed with God's presence, and here they had a choice. And for a whole year they didn't doubt God. Of course it was their spirituality. But Michael, nominally, in fact, their lives were saved. Their skin was saved. Haman was a Hitler. He didn't want to make us irreligious. He wanted us dead. Antiochus, Achashverosh, they just wanted us to assimilate. They had no problem with us. They enjoyed our taxes. They enjoyed even our culture. They even enjoyed our books, it says. They didn't enjoy the spiritual side of it. And that's why it says that they defiled the oil. They didn't destroy the temple. They didn't destroy the oil. They didn't pour out all the oil, because they said, I got no problem with traditions and customs. They were smart people, the Greeks. They came up with a lot of good ideas. And they liked Torah, because Torah has a lot of good ideas. They only objected to the spiritual aspect and their faith, that this is all based on Hashem's will. And therefore they defiled the oil. The idea of purity and impurity is super rational. It's not something that you can see with the eye. A scientist cannot see any difference. And that's what they objected to. So Michael, you're right, but nominally, in terms of the actual thing, this was a physical, this was a spiritual battle according to Russian office. Okay, got it? Yes? Thumbs
Yes,
up?
with regard to the days of rejoicing of the miracle of the military, the meal that was prescribed is with wine and meat. Specifically, it does not mention the latkes and the donuts. I would think that if Rambam says that the miracle is the miracle both of the battle and the lights, then there wouldn't be a distinction of either wine and meat or latkes and donuts, that it would just be one combined meal, just as there was one combined miracle.
No, Rambam says it's two miracles.
Yes, but
Latkes and donuts is not a law. Sorry to break it to you.
Yeah, but it comes from the oil. It comes
Right,
from
latkes and donuts is a
baking,
custom,
cooking with oil.
very nice custom. But by law, a meal has to have bread and wine, meat.
the second thing is, Rabbi,
I didn't answer your question, Al?
it does, but not totally satisfactory, because
Okay.
why bother mentioning the components of the meal when the actual meal is partially because of the miracle of lights?
Okay, so I'm
And-
explaining to you. It's
It was for the victory.
That's a custom.
Both.
Any food is not coming from the miracle of the oil. Legally. Customarily, sure. Legally, take a look at column A. The Russian alphas say, if you're eating, enjoy. But don't think you're doing a mitzvah. The obligation, I use the word obligation pointedly. It's wonderful to do custom things to thank Hashem, and everybody gets fat, and it's all wonderful. But the obligation, according to Russian alphas, and they root it in the Talmud, they're strict by the Talmud's words, is that to commemorate the miracle of the oil, which is a spiritual miracle, there's no latkes mentioned there, and not even donuts. It's praise and gratitude, saying Halal, lighting candles, end of story. Rambam says that it's both the miracle of the oil and the miracle of the battle. So for the miracle of the oil, we have the praise and gratitude, Halal and candles. And for the battle, we have the mitzvah of Simcha. He doesn't specify what that means, but sort of the commentaries, this is line 12, the commentaries of Rambam says, well, if he says the word Simcha, it makes it into a holiday. And what is a holiday? You have to eat a meal.
Right.
You follow? We don't go by Rambam. So our latkes and donuts are customary. Praise and gratitude is not latkes and donuts. It's lighting candles and saying Halal for 8 days.
Rabbi, the second question is with regard to praise and gratitude. When we say Halal for Hanukkah, it's the whole Halal. But for other holidays, it's half Halal. What distinguishes Hanukkah to require the full Halal?
So basically, all holidays,
Supposed to
most
say
holidays, we do the full Halal. The only exception
is Rosh Chodesh.
is Rosh Chodesh, because it's not really a holiday. In fact, so that's number one. It's custom to say Halal. It's not a law. So because of that, they say half. The only other thing is the Passover after the first 2 days. And it is believed that one of the reasons is because we don't want to celebrate fully the suffering of the Egyptians when they drowned, which is not only the celebration of the last 2 days, and even the other days, it wasn't such fun times. And therefore, the question is why we take it down a notch. But that's the exception. All the 9 days of Sukkot, you have Halal full. Chanukah, you have Halal full. Shavuos, you have Halal full. Pesach, you have Halal by day and by night. It's a good question. When we learn Pesach, we'll discuss why the last 6 days of Pesach we say half. But yes, a holiday that is a real holiday of praise, you say full. But that's a good question. Good point. Okay. All right. So we have.
Rabbi.
Go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, I have a question. If the Torah omits explicit mention of things that are nonetheless extremely important for our practice and thinking, for example, specific details perhaps on how to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, that are then discussed in the Talmud and laid out to help us understand, can it also be possible that the Talmud omits mention of specific things that are true and important that might also guide our reasoning, and in this case, perhaps not mentioning that there was a battle, even though it is important for us to understand that that's part of what should guide our thinking practice and shape it? I'm trying to understand a little the the difference in reasoning between Rambam and Rosh and Alphas.
Okay, very good. That's what we're going to do now, Adam. The Rebbe is going to try to not only explain the difference, but bring them together, give them common ground. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a different system, but it's similar. These are classic works. They're loaded. You know, the Torah is loaded on a different level. But yeah, not everything is explicit, and some things are implicit, and they're meant to be. So there's definitely truth to that in the Talmud, and definitely truth to that in Rambam. Look, the Rebbe is going to come along today, and he is going to dissect Talmud and the Rambam and the others based on the way he thinks they dissected Talmud. So you actually said to hit the target. But let's explain how he does that. For now, I want to just make sure we have the platform. If we have clarity, before the Rebbe shows up on the scene with the Sicha, we have two clear opinions. We have an opinion that it's only about the miracle of the lights. We have an opinion that it's about both the battle and the lights. And based on that, we have an opinion that therefore the obligation, remember that, obligation is all about candles and praise, which is halal and candles, and no value to eating meals. Could be customary value, but no mitzvah. You don't have to do it. Whereas Rambam holds it's the celebration of both the physical and the spiritual salvation, and therefore you have to have both things. And any other comments before we go further? Okay, we have it. We got it. Okay.
When is the mitzvah meal supposed to be eaten?
Excellent question. Hold that thought. And the reason why we don't know is because two reasons. First of all, the Code of Jewish Law doesn't mention it, because the Code of Jewish Law, I already told you, when 2 out of the 3 go a certain way, it follows those 2. So it's not in the Code of Jewish Law, even though Rambam was a Sephardi and Beis Yosef was a Sephardi. But 2 out of 3 go a certain way. It's not brought in Code of Jewish Law. Secondly, Rambam himself in line 12 doesn't say you must eat it. I'm just giving you a hint to what's coming. He says if the meal is eaten, it has the status of a mitzvah meal. Why doesn't Rambam say you have to eat a meal just like Purim? So you're touching on something that we're going to revisit.
Okay.
But again, and I'm using Purim as a poster boy, as the perfect contrast. Purim, we don't say Halal, even though the scholars in the room are going to say, well, it says someplace that Megillah is like Halal. We don't say Halal. They couldn't tell us to do Halal. You know what I mean? We do Halal on every holiday, even though we read the Torah and tell the story of the holiday. Why do they not give us Halal? Because Halal is nominally a spiritual thing. It's gratitude. It's about soul. Purim was about body. And that's why the mitzvahs of Purim are body. Drink, be happy, celebrate. You have to feel the joy in your body. It's very, very much physical, because it was a physical salvation. And therefore the mitzvah of Purim is purely simcha, not so much praise and gratitude. Chanukah, according to most opinions, is the opposite. Praise and gratitude and not simcha. Rambam puts it on both. Okay, now let me explain to you what the Rebbe is going to do now, okay, friends? This is something that not only the Rebbe does it really well, but a lot of great commentaries try to do this. There's a principle. We don't try to maximize machloket. I want to teach that word for those who are not familiar. You should keep a glossary as we continue to study and grow together. Machloket means a Talmudic argument, a debate. Machloket. I'm sure some of you heard the term. And there's a principle. Torah is full of machloket. The Talmuds have machloket. In this case, the Rambam and the others have a machloket. They have an argument. There is a principle in Torah. We try to find common ground between two sides of the argument. In Aramaic, lafusha machloket lo mafshina. We try not to maximize, we try to minimize a machloket. What's the reason? Not because we're afraid of it's going to get bloody. There was full respect and love and everything between them. 1 second. Why do we minimize machloket? Because if we look at this now, we're like lost. Which Talmud is this based on? If we find common ground, both of them ring truer. Both of them are rooted in the same origin, the Talmud or earlier. So the more we can find common ground, the more it makes sense to us. The more we see the wisdom in both. It's like if somebody has a real respect for the Supreme Court of the United States, for argument's sake. Okay, let's envision a court where everybody is in it just to defend the Constitution, just truth. So you're going to want to study not only the majority opinion, but the minority opinion with the same interest, because if it's the case, these are human beings who are very flawed, but if it's the case that both are just caring about defending the truth, so to speak, that's behind it, so therefore there's going to be the same wisdom in both, albeit coming to a different conclusion. Similarly, if Rambam and Alphas, it's not just petty arguments and everyone's saying, nah, I think it should be about the war. It all is based on Talmud, based on, as Adam said, which actually is a perfect segue. I could have hired you to say that there has to be ways to unravel the earlier classics in the later, in nuanced ways, just like the Torah itself. And therefore, the more we show that the two are really saying the same thing, even though they come to different conclusions, the better. That's a Torah principle. Not always we can do it. Sometimes we're left perplexed. So the Rebbe comes along, ladies and gentlemen. Today I could say ladies and gentlemen because I got Shirley. Shirley is starting a new trend. Dr. Papilsky. This is a very accomplished professional. So the Rebbe is going to come along and in a very simple way say, they're really saying the same thing, even though they come to different conclusions. They're both based on the same Talmud. But before he does that, in 19, 20, 21, the Rebbe presents a problem with each, because that's how you dissect things and you analyze it. Number one, the problem with the Rosh and the Alphas is there were, in fact, huge miraculous victories. You can't ignore them. It makes sense. It's like, wow, how could you ignore them? They happened. They were miracles. Tiny band, they were unarmed. I mean, it should be ignored? It doesn't make any sense. And here's the kicker in 21, you're listening. The fact is that we did institute the sages, and this is classical sages, who instituted the prayers. This is the time of the Mishnah, the early Mishnah, pre-Common Era almost, that they instituted a prayer called Al HaNisim, was established on the battle victory. We have two prayers of Chanukah. We have Haneris Halal, which we say over the candles, which almost doesn't discuss the victory of the battle, only the candles. But then we have another prayer, Al HaNisim, which we say in our Amidah and our benching, our grace after meals. And there, the miracle of the candles is not mentioned at all. It only mentions the victory of the battle. And this was established before the Rosh and the Rambam and before the Talmud. It was established by the men of the Great Assembly who are from the Mishnah days. So that is definitely classic Judaism. So these are the two problems with opinion A. To ignore the miracle of the victory. A, it's too big to ignore. And B, the sages, the classic ancient sages, put it into our prayers. A prayer which is all, read the Al HaNisim, there's not one word about candles. It says they came back and they lit the candles, but nothing about the miracle of the candles and the oil. It's not even mentioned. It's ignored. Whereas the war is in detail. Few against many, weak against strong, and all that. By contrast to the prayer of the Hanerot Halalu, which is done over the candles, where it's the opposite. There's no mention almost of the battle. So those are the problems with column A's view. The problem with Rambam's view is the Gemara doesn't mention battle at all. And we know Rambam is supposed to be based on the Gemara, on the Talmud. I'm using the term Gemara because that's a more scholarly term for Talmud, and I want to elevate this group to scholars as they're getting there. The Gemara doesn't mention battle at all. So these are the two problems. By creating these problems, the Rebbe is not doing it to create problems. He's doing it to help us create a solution. And the Rebbe is going to come along and say like this. Very simple answer. This is not complicated. Take a look at 23. The Rebbe's approach to this machloket. All agree there were huge miracles in battle. All agree the central issue was spiritual. Because even the battle wasn't about independence, but about faith. They don't disagree on the facts on the ground, that there was a huge miraculous battle. They also don't disagree. The Rebbe, Torah scholars in general love to say they don't disagree because it makes it more sensical. They all agree the central issue was spiritual. This is not Purim, which is about physical salvation. It's Hanukkah. Not only because the oil is a greater miracle, I don't know how you could decide it's a greater miracle than the battle, which took 7 years. But because even the battle was not a battle for survival or political independence, like it was a battle only because the enemy wanted them not to keep Torah. The enemy didn't mind if they would stay alive and be heathenistic. And therefore, even the battle is about spiritual. 26 is an important line. Even the battle was not about independence, but about faith. So the Rebbe says, what is the difference between Rambam and the others? Now there's only one small difference. Do we or do we not commemorate preparatory things? Things that happen that are important keys to getting us from A to B, but they are not the actual purpose. Since they both agree that the war battle was needed, the miracle of the battle was needed to get us to the miracle of the temple. But they also agree that it's only preparatory, meaning the theme of Hanukkah, even the physical battle, was only not for our survival. The Greeks would let us live. They would even let us do mitzvahs as long as we don't bring God in. But the battle was only to get us to the spiritual battle, because they were only against our faith. So therefore, this becomes the difference between Rambam and the others. And the Rebbe points us in many examples. I'm going to give you one example before we leave today. That most of the Rishonim, most of the scholars believe that when there is a preparation for something and then there's the actual thing, you focus on the thing. The preparation is nice, but don't get carried away with it. And Rambam, this is one of his innovations. He has basis for it in the Talmud too. Rambam says, no, a preparatory thing is also important, because without that, you didn't get here. And this becomes the difference between them. The difference is now much closer. They're not saying, these guys are not saying there's no battle victory, it doesn't matter. It matters. If not for that, you wouldn't come to this. But even the battle victory was only preparatory, because it was only a battle over faith. And it wasn't a battle over independence. And Rambam agrees with that statement. You see, this is the beauty of the Rebbe's thinking here. Rambam agrees with everything they said. You know, when you talk to somebody and you say, I agree with everything you said, but I disagree with your conclusion. It makes it a much more interesting discussion. If the two sides disagree on premises, then you got nothing to talk about. They both agree on 90% of it. They both agree, as I say in 24 and 25, that there was a miracle. They both agree that miracles is not the theme. The battle is not the theme. The battle, even the battle itself, was only for spiritual independence. It's like the Jews in Russia fighting to do mitzvahs. It wasn't. However, the debate is now just a small difference. Do we celebrate and commemorate with an obligatory mitzvah preparatory things, or do we not? Rambam says yes, they say no, and therefore this explains everything. 30. 31. Number 20. What was the question in 20? There were miraculous victories. Yes, but that wasn't the point. And that's why they say the Talmud doesn't mention it, because it's not the point. Talmud knows about the miracles, but it's not the point. Line 32. What about question in line 21? Why we have a whole prayer, which was established by classics, that is only about the victory of the war. Of course, because in fact, there were miracles. However, look at 33. You don't need to repeat the Amidah or benching. There are certain laws. If I say a certain prayer, I'm supposed to say Ya'aleh v'yavo on Rosh Chodesh, and I forget. Do I or do I not repeat the Amidah or the grace? And that law will depend on how important that particular prayer is vis-a-vis the insert to the prayer. So if I forget Ya'aleh v'yavo on Rosh Chodesh, with the exception of the evening prayer, I have to repeat the whole Amidah. And it goes other things, right? If you ask for the winter and the summer and vice versa, there's all kind of laws you can get. It's very Jewish. You can get a good headache just from those laws. What about, but most time the general rule is that if something is important, you have to go back and fix it if you didn't do it. Like if I didn't say Ya'aleh v'yavo in any of the holidays, during the grace or doing the prayers, I have to repeat it. Pretty certain that's a principle. What about Al HaNisim? Al HaNisim, which is the prayer that we say in the grace or in the Amidah during Purim, during Chanukah, if you forgot it, no, you don't go back, ever. So this explains, says the Rebbe, why. because they made a prayer about the miracles, but they made it a separate prayer. Notice, it's very interesting. This is the opinion of column A. And Rambam will agree with it to a great degree. That since the miracle of the battle was only preparatory, there is a prayer made for it, but it's a separate prayer, not part of the prayer over the candles. In the prayer over the candles, the war is not mentioned. And of course, the main observance of Hanukkah is the candles. You don't mention the war at all. But because the battle also had miracles, you want to thank God, they made a separate prayer for it. And that prayer doesn't mention the candles. We don't want to mix the two because this is so important and this is only a preparatory. However, we gave it lip service because it is, in fact, an additional reason to thank God, but it's not important to the point that if you forgot it, you never go back, which is an exception all the holidays. I forget to say the holiday, except for I forget to say the holiday. In the Amidah, I have to repeat the Amidah. And here you just go on. I missed it. There's a way to fix it, not for now. If you didn't finish yet, the benching, whatever. But the alanissim, is it an obligation? It's an obligation in the first instance. But if you forgot, it doesn't matter. And that makes sense of their view. Now that we know that their view is they don't poo-poo the battle. They don't say the battle didn't happen and it wasn't huge miraculous. They agree with Rambam. But they say it's only preparatory. And therefore a prayer was said, but it doesn't become an obligation to the point of having to repeat the miracle. Whereas Rambam, what was the question on line 31? What was the question we asked on the Rambam on line 20? That the Talmud does not mention the battle at all. Says Rambam, of course it doesn't mention it because it's not the main point. Adam, this is exactly what you were thinking, I think, in between your lines. The Talmud doesn't have to mention the battle. The Talmud ignores the battle because it wants you to understand what the main point is. But history tells us, and there's something called Megillus Antiochus, Brian knows, a whole Megillah which tells the story of a 7-year battle, and the Talmudists knew about it. They hinted in one word, and the Hashmonaim overpowered. But the Talmud on purpose ignores it, and that's not a problem for Rambam because he agrees it's only preparatory in nature. However, Rambam's opinion in all things of Jewish law, most things of Jewish law, is a preparation for a mitzvah as part of a mitzvah. By the way, you all heard of Hillel and Shammai. They are the root of these two approaches. Is a preparation important or not? And that's why, for example, Hillel says you go from 1 candle to 8, and Shammai says you go from 8 to 1. It has to do you look at things in the potential or in the actual? And the potential means do you look at it in the preparation or do you look only the actual final result? So, but just put that aside and I'm sure we'll get to that Sicha one day as well. But the Rambam in general, he's not revolutionary here. He's not going against the Talmud. He's reading the Talmud the same way they are. Both opinions are almost exactly identical. There is a battle miracle, and it's to be remembered. The question is to what degree? Does it become an obligation and make it a mitzvah of a meal? Or is it make a prayer, but if you forgot the prayer, continue, don't go back. Whereas Rambam says, no, preparation of a mitzvah is important. And here's the kicker, which answers Alan's question in line 34. Notice, the meal isn't an absolute obligation. It's the strangest thing. And the commentaries on Rambam struggle with this, but the Rebbe reads it very smoothly. There are hundreds of commentaries on Rambam. There are many classic commentaries on Rambam. And they struggle since Rambam says that what? And Rambam is a big boy. He's well respected in the circles of Jewish law. Rambam clearly says in line 12, that in line 11, that the mitzvah of the Chanukah is supposed to be observed by both praise and by Simcha. And Simcha in Jewish law means meals. So how come the phrase is used that if you eat a meal, it becomes a status of a mitzvah? He should say, eat a meal. We still don't know when to eat that meal. Should you eat it the first day? Should you eat it every day? I mean, he says, if you eat the meal, then it constitutes a mitzvah. Strange language. It's not from the Rambam itself, it's from his close student. But the fact is that is written in a passive way. So this, says the Rebbe in line 34, is perhaps because of this whole thesis that the Rebbe approaches it. That since Rambam in principle agrees that the Chanukah is not about physical salvation like Purim, where the main thing is the meal. because Purim is all about the fact that Hashem loves us as a people, as a physical people, and his physical survival and all that. Chanukah is all about the faith and the spiritual. Even Rambam agrees, and therefore, however, since he holds a preparatory is also to be celebrated and to be highlighted and commemorated, so he makes it. So he says that there's a day of joy. You have to have joy on Chanukah, but it has to be a mitzvah of a meal. He didn't go so far. It's passive. If you eat a meal, it becomes an obligation meal, becomes a mitzvah. In fact, for those who are following, there's one more. The Rambam uses the word simcha. On Purim, the word is simcha umishta. It's a step more. It's joy which obligates a meal. Whereas Rambam says just simcha. Now, normally simcha is meat and wine and a meal. And if you do it, great. But it's not obligatory. I want to just point out, I should have put in one more line here, that based on the Rebbe's thesis, based on the Rebbe's approach, we can understand why the custom is that we do eat meals. We don't get carried away with having bread and wine and meat. There isn't a prescription of when to eat the meal and what to eat on that meal. However, even the Code of Jewish Law, which I told you, does not mention. The Code of Jewish Law doesn't go by Rambam. It goes by the other two because they're the majority. And the Code of however, the Code of Jewish Law and the commentaries on it, the Ramah, say that it's nevertheless customary to eat joyous meals. Hence the latkes and the donuts, and even very pious Jews who are not just into eating meals and entertaining their kids, eat latkes and I don't know about donuts, that's a new one, but eat foods with oil, and they get together with family and they have the concept of meal celebration without a particular prescription. It's nice this way. And yep, if you must eat 3 times a day, oh, you got, and then tomorrow again, so you got to kill yourself until you feel the joy. On Hanukkah, you get to eat. You know, people do 1 Hanukkah night or 2 if they can afford it. But so this is another application. I should have put it down here. This explains even custom of food festivities, even according to these opinions. How do I know it's their opinion? Because it's brought in the code. And therefore, the Rebbe came along and minimized a debate. Did you guys follow this?
Yeah, you have to eat fried chicken.
I'm not getting enough thumbs up here or nods. Yes?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much. So this is, I'm going to give you one application which will help you. But this is what we learned. This is what we learned. Really quickly to recap. Now that you learned it, you'll be able to see it really easily. Again, the Talmud makes a statement that the celebration is about the oil and it ignores the war. The Rishonim, column A, 2 out of the 3 say it's strictly about the miracle of the lights, and therefore we only commemorate it with spiritual commemoration. There's no value to meals, whereas Rambam says it's a commemoration of both things, the battle and the lights, and therefore there is also a concept of a meal by default once you ate it. And we explained the reasoning in line 15, whether it's a spiritual miracle or it's also material. The Rebbe in 17 pivots the whole thing and says this machloket is not a big machloket. It's a very small machloket. They have total common ground, which makes it ring true. I hope you got that point. It's an important point about Torah study. It makes it ring true that they're both rooted in Talmud. They're not just giving opinions. Because if you analyze it, 2021, the Rosh and the Rif and the Alphas cannot ignore that there were grace miracles. The proof is that we have a prayer that's established for the victory. Conversely, Rambam has a problem that the Talmud doesn't mention the battle at all. So the Rebbe comes along and says, here is what they all agree upon. And this is what they all read from the Talmud. Of course, there were miraculous battles for a long time, but they're not the main point. They all agree on that too. Not only because the battles were leading up to a greater miracle, but the battles were not about physical survival. To survive, they didn't have to fight. The battles were about their faith. And therefore, it's important to get that. And therefore, their opinion, so 28 is the main point of this Sicha. The only dispute is about one thing: do we commemorate and do we make a central emphasis on preparatory things, or do we not? Rambam says yes, they say no. But everybody agrees that the war is secondary. It's only a preparation to the faith. And everybody agrees that the war is a big deal too. And now we understand, this is to me, the funnest part of the Sicha, 30 to 34. Now we understand why the other opinion, the laws, we still say Al Hanissim prayer, which is all about the war, only about the war. Notice it, it's very strange. But it's not an obligation to the point that if you forget that prayer, you don't repeat the benching, because it is there, but it's a minor thing. Also, the thing I just added in 34, there is a custom for food festivities, even according to the Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch, which goes with the ruling of Kalamei, not just because we're impressed with Rambam, which we are, but also because Rambam makes sense. There was a battle of war, which was tremendously miraculous. However, it is only customary. And in fact, Rambam himself in 34 says that the meal, there's no obligation for a prescribed meal. If you ate a meal, it becomes a Sudas mitzvah. It becomes a mitzvah meal. Arnie? Oh, Arnie's joining our class. Come say hello.
That was very good. Very
Got
good.
that? Now I want to
Who's
just finish it. One last thought. Arnie's explaining
that?
why.
Who's that?
It's Arnie.
Who is
He's
it?
He's here to dance.
He's a dreidel.
Car parade.
Who is it?
I don't know.
It's Arnie, who was just in our class.
He's dressed up as a dreidel.
See? We don't see you. Get down. It's Arnie.
Arnie.
It's very difficult to study and focus on this very high level, scholarly, Talmudic stuff with Arnie dressed as a dreidel right behind you.
Mark, it's a miraculous transformation.
Yeah, now listen. Let me leave you one last thought, which is helpful. This is easy. I'm giving you an example of an application of this machloket. When do you make a bracha on a mitzvah? When you're making it or performing it? For example, you're building your sukkah a week before Sukkot. Do you make a blessing on then? Or do you make a blessing when you sit in the sukkah? The same thing is tefillin. I went with my son for his bar mitzvah and we bought tefillin. Do we make a bracha that we're fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin? Because we're buying tefillin. Or when we put it on. So you see where we're going. There's a preparatory and there's actual. So the truth is that both opinions, Rambam and the others agree, the actual blessing is made when you perform the mitzvah. Even Rambam says, even though Rambam is a big proponent of the value of preparation as intricate to the mitzvah, nevertheless, you can't make a bracha on your sukkah a week before Sukkot. You can't make a bracha on your tefillin when you bought it in the store or by the scribe, because you're not doing the mitzvah. The bracha is when you do the mitzvah. However, interestingly enough, that what about the shechayanu, which is made the first time you do tefillin, according to some opinions, or the first time you sit in the sukkah, or whatever. So here Rambam differs. The others say the shechayanu is made at the same time when you sit in the sukkah, the first night of sukkahs, you're doing the mitzvah, and you make shechayanu too. You make the bracha leishe basuk and shechayanu. Rambam says, interestingly enough, that when you build your sukkah, if you feel like making shechayanu, then make it then. Because now you are given the opportunity, shechayanu, that God allowed me to do the sukkah. God allowed me to own tefillin, shechayanu. He doesn't go so far as to say you should make the bracha on the tefillin then, because you're not doing the mitzvah, you're not by mitzvah yet maybe, or you're not wearing them. But because again, Rambam is not full. Rambam realizes it's only preparatory. But to Rambam, what are you talking? Preparatory is real. Without preparation, nothing happens. It's like if I walk into this class without making this spreadsheet. Good luck to me. So therefore, Rambam says even in the blessing, the laws of blessing, shechayanu is made or can be made when you actually make the mitzvah and not when you do it. And what is the takeaway? Everyone can think about their own takeaway because the Rebbe doesn't give one in the Sicha. But the takeaway to me, and I think it's correct, why we have both opinions, to learn from both. In life, we have the preparatory and we have the actual. Why are we here on this earth? The Talmud says, the Medrash says, the Torah says, even the Tanakh, Ani Nevreisi L'Shamash Eskaini. I was created to serve my Maker. That's the only reason why we're here, to serve our Maker, which is mitzvahs and Torah study. Everything else is just preparatory. So the Rush and the Alphas and the others, they say, stay focused on your life. I know you have to make a living and you have to eat and you have to sleep and you have to have vacations and you have to do all kind of wonderful stuff. However, remember, that's not important. In the context of Hanukkah, it wouldn't be mentioned in the Talmud. Stay focused on the goals. We're here to serve God. Life is short. Every time you have a chance to study Torah and do a mitzvah, now you're living. Everything else, it's a distraction. It may be a necessary distraction, but it's a distraction. in the Hellenistic context, if you forgot to eat breakfast, you don't have to go back and eat it. It's not that important. You'll eat lunch. Meanwhile, go to do a mitzvah. Rambam is, the Rebbe believes, even though he was such a halachist and such a philosopher, the Rebbe believes a Kabbalistic bent under the surface. And the Rebbe shows it in many ways. The Rambam says every part of life prepares for the mitzvah. How can I do a mitzvah if I'm not healthy? How can I buy a sukkah if I don't make a living? How can I have a Shabbos meal if I don't make a living? How can I do a mitzvah with joy if I'm not healthy and happy? And therefore, every single behavior, if I do it with some intention, not just in a vac, just to have fun, but I'm living a healthy, happy, meaningful, wholesome existence and a successful existence, even on a human terms, because then I can be optimum servant of Hashem. All of it is a mitzvah. Now, Rambam too is saying, don't get carried away. Don't make it a mitzvah about having your cup of coffee. But understand that every moment of life you're serving Hashem. You serve Hashem in every way. Again, I don't know whether they'll disagree with it, but the Rambam celebrates it more because Kabbalistically and mystically, spiritually, there isn't any moment when we're separate from Hashem and we're on our own. We're always in the service. But sometimes it's preparation, and Rambam sees it as very important.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Is it possible to compare Hanukkah with Pesach in that there is a military victory? The Jews, after all, survived a small band of people against a Egyptian army, and that there was praise and thanksgiving once they reached the other shore, that we celebrate with a Seder, which is obligatory, or at least eating the matzah is obligatory, correct?
Of course.
So how is it that we have these obligatory meals and an obligatory symbol of the whole experience, and we don't have the experience, we don't have an obligation of meal or the symbol of victory, which would be oil here?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your last question. You're saying that Pesach seems like Hanukkah, therefore?
But the obligation for celebration of Hanukkah is so different from Pesach, because there is no obligation to eat the meal and there's no obligation to eat the symbol of the victory, which would be the oil.
So my understanding, there's a whole Sicha of the Rebbe where he compares, it's in book 30, we're reading book 10, where the Rebbe compares Pesach, Purim, and Hanukkah. And I looked at it very quickly last night, and it's interesting. We'll get there. Let's stick around. In 8 years, we'll cover a lot of these, but let's all be healthy. My understanding is that no, Pesach is both, completely both. It's completely Purim and completely Hanukkah. And that's why it is full of Halal. It's spiritual in nature. We became God's people, but also the miracles of survival were very much physical in nature. Hashem had to show his power within nature. He had to show that he knows exactly what time the plague is going to stop. It was very much about winning over the physical kingdom of Pharaoh. So apparently, again, I looked at it very briefly, and the Rebbe shows that it has application in Jewish law. By Pesach, the celebration is the day of the victory, and Hanukkah, it's the day after. Again, I don't want to say more because I'm not clear on it, but this discussion is discussed, is what I'm trying to say. You're bringing up a point that's discussed, And my understanding is that Pesach is both, and that's why there's an obligation of a meal and an obligation of this. But you're better off comparing Hanukkah to Purim because both of them are rabbinic mitzvahs, which commemorate these two facets. Because you have other holidays, and you could get involved which one each one is. Generally speaking, every holiday only has one energy, and we only have one energy throughout the year of that. Hanukkah gives us this, Purim gives us this, Pesach gives us this. But anyway, the contrast of Hanukkah to Purim is very clear. I'm going to post this on the chat. Marty and Shirley, I'm going to make sure you're on this chat. And if you wish, you could review the Sicha inside. I didn't tell you anything that's not in the Sicha. It seems like I did, but I studied it. I studied the footnotes. And another essay of the Rebbe later on this. The Rebbe is big on this subject. And you should just know that the Rebbe's whole attitude is as much as you can do. And he loved Rambam, even though Rambam, we didn't go by Rambam in Halacha. Rambam does not get the ruling in many cases. The Rebbe believes it's like Rabbi Meir. It's like the brightest ones didn't get their way, but they are onto something. And the Rebbe encouraged us to eat meals. He didn't make it a halacha because he's not going to change halacha. You can't change halacha. However, the Rebbe would say that this line 34, the custom of eating food, you should encourage it and you should give gelt, and because Rambam knows what he's talking about, and it's a happy time. In addition, because the Rebbe is very much into, we had it in last week's Sicha, very much into the fact that we serve Hashem in all your ways. Remember, you're not serving Hashem when you're wrapping tefillin. You're serving Hashem when you're eating breakfast, when you're going to work, when you're dealing with your clients. And it will manifest itself in the way you deal with your clients. And therefore, there's no point to avoid of Hashem. I'm sorry I went over time, and I'm sorry I didn't give a lot of time for discussion. You'll forgive me. This was a, I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I told Sarah when I'm leaving the house, this is probably my favorite share that I've given to this group. But I wanted to do justice to it, okay? And we can have discussion on the chat if we want to further. I'm going to run because I'm needed. That's probably them calling me.
Yes, I liked it, Rabbi.
Great, so did I.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, it'll all be on the chat.
Thank
Love
you,
you all.
Rabbi.
Love you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Marty and Shirley, Freilich and Chanukah.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Alan, thank you for being here. How do I get out of here?
Rabbi, can you share that timeline of oral law as well?
Sure. I'll put them both. It'll be a little later when I get my phone, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks, Rabbi.
All right.